Her hands would not stop shaking. Not from fear, not from cold. From something worse. The kind of knowing that lives in your chest before your mind catches up. Nyara Adewale-Kang stood in front of a floor-to-ceiling mirror in a bridal suite 42 floors above Manhattan, wearing $120,000 worth of ivory silk, and she felt absolutely nothing. The dress was perfect. The room was perfect. The flowers lining the windowsill, iced as white peonies and gold-dipped eucalyptus, smelled exactly the way a wedding was supposed to smell. Somewhere behind her, a stylist was pressing the last curl into place. Someone else was adjusting the cathedral train. A third woman was saying something about the veil, about the light, about how beautiful she looked. Nyara watched all of it in the mirror like she was watching someone else's life. If you are new here, this is the kind of story we tell on this channel. Stories that go where most people are afraid to look. Stories where love is not safe, where truth is not gentle, and where the most dangerous choice a person can make is simply being honest. Welcome. Stay close. Her name was Nyara Adewale-Kang, 28 years old, Columbia graduate, daughter of Obinna Adewale, one of the most powerful Nigerian-born financial strategists on Wall Street, and Daejin Kwon, a Korean-American architect whose buildings were in 4 countries. She had grown up between Lagos, London, and New York. She spoke 3 languages. She had never once in her life done anything reckless. Until today. At 4:12 p.m., with 2 hours left before she became Mrs. Daejin Kwon, Nyara picked up her phone. Her fingers moved before her brain gave permission. She opened a contact she had not touched in 9 years. A name that lived at the very bottom of her saved list, buried under everything she had tried to build on top of it. She stared at it for 11 seconds. She counted. And then she typed 7 words. "If you still want me, come get me." Her thumb hovered. Then she pressed send. For 3 seconds, the room kept moving around her. The stylist kept talking. The peonies kept smelling sweet. The Manhattan skyline kept glittering gold and silver through the glass. Then Nyara's stomach dropped through the floor. Because somewhere across this city, or across this world, what she genuinely did not know. A man who had not spoken to her in 9 years had just received a message that could burn everything down. The stylist touched her shoulder gently. "You okay, honey? You went pale." Nyara looked up at her reflection. Dark skin luminous under soft light. Eyes that gave nothing away. Jaw set like a woman who had made peace with her decisions. She smiled. "I'm fine, just nerves." That was the first lie she told that afternoon. It would not be the last. Here is what nobody in that room knew about Nyara Adewale-Kang. Here is what she had spent the better part of a decade making sure nobody knew. She was not marrying Daejin Kwon because she loved him. She was marrying him because she had run out of reasons not to. Daejin was 32, Korean American. The kind of man who walked into rooms and rearranged the air pressure. He had a jaw that looked carved, eyes that stayed absolutely still when he was thinking, and a smile that had been specifically designed to make people feel chosen. He ran Kwon Global Partners, a private equity firm with holdings in 9 countries. His philanthropic foundation had his name on 2 university buildings. He had never once raised his voice at her. He had never once been anything less than perfectly controlled. That was what terrified her. Not his anger, his control, because Nyara had grown up watching powerful men. Her father was one. She understood the difference between a man who was kind and a man who had simply decided that softness was the most efficient strategy. Daejin was the second kind. She had known it for a long time. She had chosen to know it quietly, the way you choose not to press on a bruise because you already know it will hurt. 3 months before the wedding, at a dinner with his business partners in a private room at a midtown restaurant, one of the men had made a comment about Nyara. Something about how lucky Daejin was. The man had let his eyes stay on her 1 second too long, and Daejin had not said a word. He had simply placed his hand over Nyara's on the table, applied the lightest possible pressure to her knuckles, and smiled. The man had changed the subject immediately. Later in the car, Daejin had looked out the window the entire ride home. When they pulled up to her building, he finally turned to her and said very quietly, "You smiled at him." Nyara had said, "He made a joke. I was being polite." Daejin had nodded slowly. "You belong here," he said. "With me, not performing for other men." He had kissed her cheek, helped her out of the car, and waited until she was inside the lobby before the car pulled away. She had stood in her elevator for 4 full floors trying to figure out if that was love or a warning. She still did not know. Now, in the bridal suite, her phone buzzed. One new message. She looked down. "Stay where you are." 3 words. No punctuation. No questions. No emotion in the syntax. Just 3 words delivered like a decision that had already been made. Nyara read them once, then again. Her heart did not race. It did something stranger and more terrifying. It settled. The way a person exhales after holding their breath so long they forgot they were doing it. Because that response, those 3 flat, certain, almost impossible words, sounded exactly like him. It sounded exactly like Jae-hyun-ryu. The stylist announced the veil was ready. Someone brought champagne. The room filled with soft sound and golden light, and the particular warmth of women who believed they were watching something beautiful happen. And Nyara stood in the center of all of it, with her phone pressed against her thigh and 3 words burning through her palm. "Stay where you are." She looked at herself in the mirror one final time. Really looked. Past the dress and the makeup and the composed expression she had spent years perfecting. She looked at the girl underneath all of it. The girl who had made a promise in the rain at 17 and had spent 9 years pretending she had not. The question she could not answer, the one that was going to follow her down that aisle, was this. Had she just sent that message to feel something? Or had she sent it because she already knew he would come? She did not know yet. But in exactly 1 hour and 48 minutes, she was going to find out. Does Nyara actually love Daejin? Or has she been performing love so long she cannot tell the difference anymore? And who exactly is the man who responded in 3 words with the calm of someone who was never surprised? Chapter 2. He was not a violent boy. That was what people always got wrong about Jae-hyun-ryu. They looked at what he became and assumed it had always been there. Some darkness wired into him from birth. Some signal his eyes gave off that marked him as dangerous before he ever did a single dangerous thing. That was not the truth. The truth was that Jae-hyun was, at 14, one of the quietest people Nyara had ever met. He read. He listened more than he spoke. He had a way of standing very still in a room full of moving people that made him seem older than he was, like he had already calculated every possible outcome and decided none of them required urgency. His English carried a mild Korean accent that softened his consonants. He wore the same 3 colors, black, navy, gray, in rotation, every day, like color was a distraction he had already eliminated. She noticed him 3 weeks into the fall term at Hartwell Academy in London, in the back corner of an AP literature class, and her first thought, which she would never in her life admit to anyone, was that he looked like someone had drawn him with too much intention. Her second thought, which came approximately 4 minutes later when the teacher called on him and he answered without lifting his eyes from the page, was that he was going to be complicated. She was right about that. She had no idea how right. They became friends the way most real friendships start, not by choosing each other, but by ending up in the same place often enough that pretending not to know each other required more effort than just talking. The library, the East Courtyard during lunch when both of them were avoiding the noise of the main hall, the corner table in the school's common room where the Wi-Fi was strongest. Nyara was the daughter of a Nigerian-born Wall Street name and a Korean-American architect. She had her mother's precision and her father's warmth and a laugh that could fill a room if she decided to use it, which was not always. She was British-raised but American-souled. She code-switched between 3 versions of herself depending on who was in the room, and she was fully aware of that, and she had never decided whether she was proud of it or tired of it. Jae-hyun was, officially, the son of a Korean diplomat stationed in London. Unofficially, And this was the thing that Nyara would only understand years later. He was a boy being raised by a ghost. His father was present in the way that men who carry enormous weight are present, physically in the house, emotionally somewhere else entirely. His mother had died when he was 7. He did not talk about her. When Nyara asked once, gently, twice, he looked at her for a moment with an expression that was not sad exactly, more like the kind of careful you develop when something has been broken so many times you have learned exactly how to hold it so it does not break again. She did not ask again. What she noticed instead, what she catalogued quietly over weeks and then months, was this. Jae-hyun watched people the way most people watched weather. Constantly, automatically. Not with suspicion exactly, but with the particular attention of someone who had learned that information was safety. He knew things about the people around him before they told him. He noticed exits. He sat with his back to walls. He was never, not once, caught off guard. Except by her. That was the thing he never admitted either. And the thing she felt without needing him to say it. She was the one person who made him react instead of calculate. She made him laugh in a way that always seemed to surprise him, like joy was a room he rarely entered and she kept leaving the door open. They were 15 when the first incident happened. It was a Tuesday, after school. A group of older boys, 6th formers, cornered Nyara near the east gate of the school grounds. There were 4 of them. One of them had decided, with the specific cruelty that certain boys develop when they feel like power is something they can just take, that Nyara's refusal to give him her number 2 weeks earlier required a response. He grabbed her wrist. It was not a long moment. It lasted maybe 12 seconds from the grab to the end. But those 12 seconds were enough for Nyara to understand something about Jae-hyun Ryu that changed the shape of everything that came after. He came from behind her. She had not seen him there. She did not know how long he had been watching or how he had gotten there so fast. He stepped between her and the boy with a stillness that was somehow louder than noise, and he said something in a low voice that Nyara could not fully hear. The boy laughed, made a comment, shoved Jae-hyun's shoulder. What happened in the next 8 seconds was not dramatic. It was not a movie fight with swinging and shouting. It was precise. Jae-hyun moved like he had done this before, not like a teenager who had been in a schoolyard scuffle, but like someone who had been trained in the specific science of making a person understand very quickly that continuing was not in their interest. The boy ended up against the brick wall with his wrist bent at an angle that made him go completely silent. His 3 friends went completely still. Jae-hyun held the position for exactly 3 seconds. Then he let go, stepped back, and without looking at the other boys, said, with total calm, "Walk away." They walked away. He turned to Nyara. Her heart was doing something complicated against her ribs. Not fear, something adjacent to it, something with more warmth in it than fear is supposed to have. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She said no. He nodded. Oh, and then, as if what had just happened was simply an item on a checklist that was now complete, he picked up her bag from the ground where it had fallen, handed it to her, and said, "Come on. Library closes at 5. Nyara followed him. She did not say thank you. He did not expect it. That was the day she understood that Jae-hyun's stillness was not absence. It was compression. There was something underneath it, something with force and heat and complete certainty. And on most days it was perfectly controlled. It did not scare her. That was the part she turned over in her mind for weeks afterward. It did not scare her at all. It made her feel, for the first time in her life, completely safe. 2 years passed. They were 17 the night it rained, not a soft London drizzle, a real rain. But the kind that comes down with intention, soaking everything in under a minute, turning the streets into mirrors. They had been walking back from a late study session, just the 2 of them, the way it often was by then. And the sky opened up with no warning. They ran. There was a covered walkway near the school's back garden, and they reached it breathless and soaked and laughing. Nyara's hair was completely destroyed. Jae-hyun had water running down the side of his face, and he was looking at her with that expression he sometimes had, the one that was not quite a smile but was positioned somewhere just before one, like he was deciding whether to let it happen. She laughed, wrung water out of the end of her twist-out, said something ridiculous about the weather, and then she said the thing she had not planned to say. Why, it came out the way real things come out, without rehearsal, without strategy, arriving already formed like it had been waiting in her chest for exactly this moment. "If I ever get lost," she said, still half laughing, still trying to fix her hair. "If I ever end up somewhere I'm not supposed to be, come find me." The laughter died. Not unpleasantly, more like the air in the space between them changed temperature. Jae-hyun looked at her. The rain came down 2 feet away from them, loud and steady. The garden lights bled orange into the wet dark. He was very close. They were both pressed to the wall to stay under the narrow roof. And when he looked at her, it was with the full weight of his attention. All of it. No calculation, no containment, just him. "You mean that?" he asked. It was the quietest she had ever heard his voice. She nodded, still thinking it was romantic, still thinking she was in the middle of a sweet, charged teenage moment she would one day remember warmly. He stepped slightly closer. Just slightly. The distance between them became something with texture. "If I come for you," he said, "I won't ask twice." The words landed differently than she expected. Not like a promise a boy makes in the rain, like a contract, like something being signed in a language she understood by instinct but could not yet read with her eyes. She held his gaze, did not step back, did not look away. And he looked at her, really looked, the way he had never quite let himself look before, for exactly long enough that she felt it in places that had nothing to do with being cold or wet or 17. Then he looked away, back at the rain. His jaw worked once. "Let's go," he said. "Your train." She followed him. 3 blocks from the station, without turning to look at her, he said quietly, "One day you'll belong to a world you can't leave." She asked what he meant. He did not answer. She almost asked again. Something stopped her. Chapter 3. She waited for him for 2 years. She did not admit that to herself at the time. She dressed it up in other language. She was busy. She was focused. She was not the kind of girl who waited for anyone. She was Nyara Adewale-Kang, and she had places to be and futures to build, and a father who expected her to be brilliant. She did not wait for boys. She did not wait for anyone, but she checked her phone with a frequency that had nothing to do with school or family or anything that was actually happening in her real life. And every time she walked into a room, any room, anywhere, there was a half-second before she adjusted to reality during which she scanned for him. Without meaning to, without choosing to. He was gone. Not gone the way people go when they move away or change schools or simply drift. Gone the way a stone drops into deep water. One day, Jae-hyun Ryu was at Hartwell, sitting in the back corner of AP Literature, watching everything, saying little, and then the next day, cleanly, completely, without a single word of warning or goodbye. He was not. His dormitory room had been cleared. His name was removed from the school register. When Nyara asked the school administrator, the woman looked at her file for less than 5 seconds and said his enrollment had been withdrawn by his family. That was it. No note, no message. No last conversation that she could look back on and find meaning in. Just absence, immediate and total, like someone had pressed delete on a file she had not known she was saving. She was 19. She cried once in the shower where no one could hear her. She gave herself exactly that one time. Then she straightened her spine and went back to being someone who did not need things she could not have. The rumors started about 8 months later. She heard the first one from a girl at Columbia who had family connections in Seoul. The girl mentioned it casually at a party. Something about a name moving through certain circles in South Korea. A name attached to power and quiet violence and the kind of reputation that does not get built in boardrooms. Ryu. Just that. No first name, no face attached. Nyara set down her cup and said she had never heard of it. She spent the next 3 hours pretending that was true. Over the following months, the name surfaced in strange places, twice in conversations between men at her father's dinner table who went quiet when they noticed her nearby. Once in a financial news profile about untraceable capital movements between Seoul, Macau, and London. Once, most disturbing, least forgettable, in a conversation her father had on the phone in his study, which she was not supposed to hear, in which he said Ryu's name with the specific careful weight that powerful men reserve for other powerful men they are genuinely concerned about. She never asked her father what he knew. She did not want the answer. She was 22 when she met Daejin Kwon. It was at a charity gala her father hosted at the plaza. 140 guests, a string quartet, the particular golden atmosphere that money creates when it decides to be generous in front of witnesses. Nyara was wearing a deep green dress and doing the work she always did at her father's events, managing the room, being charming, being her father's daughter. Daejin found her at the end of the evening near the bar when the crowd had thinned. He was taller than she expected. He had a way of standing that occupied space without aggression, the way buildings do. He introduced himself simply, no listing of his credentials, no name-dropping of his holdings, which told her immediately that he had concluded she already knew who he was. He was not wrong. He said, "Your father speaks about you constantly, but somehow never mentioned how uncomfortable you look at these things." She looked at him. "I'm not uncomfortable." "You've checked the exit twice since I walked over," he said. "And you're holding your glass in your left hand even though you're right-handed, which means you're keeping your dominant hand free." She was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled, because what else do you do when someone outplays you in the first exchange? "Daejin Kwon," she said, "you did your homework." "Always," he said. That was the beginning. He was good at the beginning. She would give him that, even later, even after everything. He was extremely good at beginnings. He called when he said he would. He remembered everything she said. He showed up to things that mattered to her. He asked about her work. He did not try to impress her, or rather, he was strategic enough to know that trying to impress her would not impress her, which is itself a form of impression that is harder to resist. 6 months in, she almost believed she was in love. 7 months in, something shifted. Small things. So small she filed each one away individually, not connecting them, the way you set a series of stones on a table not knowing you are building a pattern. The way he would arrive unannounced at her apartment with the particular calm of someone who did not feel the need to announce himself because he had already decided where he belonged. The way he spoke to her in front of his colleagues, warmly, always warmly, but with a specific possessive inflection on the word mine that she never quite challenged because it happened fast, and it sounded like affection. The way, when she mentioned an old friend, just a memory, just a name from school, he became very still and asked a series of questions that were individually reasonable and collectively felt like an audit. She told herself she was reading too much into things. She told herself she had trust issues. She told herself that after years of waiting for someone who vanished, it was natural to find commitment unnerving. She told herself that Daejin was real and present and stable, and that stability was not a trap. She said yes when he proposed. He had done it at a private dinner. No audience, which she appreciated, no performance, just the two of them. A ring that was objectively stunning, and a speech that was, she had to admit, beautifully composed. He told her she was the only person he had ever met who saw through him. He told her she made him want to be honest. She said yes. And on the drive home, with the ring on her finger catching the light of passing street lamps, she thought about a rain-soaked night in London and a voice that said, "I won't ask twice," and she held that thought in her hands for exactly 10 seconds before she set it down. She did not look back at it. She told herself. What she did not know, could not have known, was that 3 weeks before she said yes, Daejin had a meeting. Not in his office, not in any of his known properties. in a building in Midtown that had no signage and no lobby directory and a private elevator that required a key card that had no name on it. He met with 2 men. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. When he left, he was smiling. She did not know about that meeting. She did not know what was discussed in it. She would. Chapter 4. The flowers arrived at 2 p.m. White peonies, 40 stems, arranged in 3 towering vases that lined the entrance of the venue's grand hall, like a sentence being spoken in a language that meant this is serious, this is real, this is already done. The scent reached the elevator before Nyara did. It was beautiful. She noticed it the way she noticed most beautiful things that day, from a distance, like she was standing on the other side of glass. The Grand Ashford in Midtown Manhattan. It's one of those venues that does not advertise. That does not need to. Its ballroom had hosted 2 state dinners and 1 royal wedding, and the walls remembered all of it the way old money remembers itself, quietly, completely, without needing to say so. Nyara had arrived at the venue at 2:15 to find 50 people already in motion. Her wedding coordinator, a sharp Korean-American woman named Clara, who communicated exclusively through precise, rapid instructions, met her at the door with a clipboard and the expression of someone who had shepherded enough of these events to have stopped feeling feelings about them. Florist confirmed, catering confirmed, string quartet in place. Pastor Yoon arrived at 1:30. Guests begin arriving at 5. Clara paused, looked at Nyara. You should go up. Nyara went up. The bridal suite was everything it was supposed to be. Ivory and gold, mirrors on 2 walls, a window that framed the Manhattan skyline like it had been put there by a set designer. The women her mother had arranged, 2 stylists, a makeup artist, a photographer who moved silently around the edges of everything, were already waiting. Her mother arrived 11 minutes later. Kang moved through rooms the way she designed buildings, with total intention, every step placed, nothing wasted. She was 55 and looked like what happened when beauty and discipline spent 3 decades working together. She kissed Nyara's cheek, held her face for a moment, and looked at her with an expression that Nyara had never been fully able to translate. Not quite pride, not quite worry, something sitting exactly between them. Beautiful, her mother said. Nyara smiled. That was the second lie. The room filled slowly. Her mother's cousin, 2 friends from Colombia, Amara and Jade, who were the kind of women who arrived already glowing as though they had decided days ago to be radiant on her behalf. Her father appeared briefly, looked at her in her dress and pressed his lips together in the particular way he did when something moved him and he had decided not to let it move him in public. He held her hand for a moment, said nothing, which was the most he had ever said. Downstairs, the hall was filling. She knew the guest list the way she knew most things in her life, precisely because precision was how she managed the fact that so many things felt like they were slightly outside her control. 412 guests. A cross-section of 2 families' accumulated power and relationship. Korean business families, Nigerian diplomatic circles, Wall Street names, 3 senators, a former ambassador, 2 people whose net worth had more zeros in it than Nyara cared to think about on a day that was supposed to be about love. Daejin's side of the hall would be heavy with Kwon Global Partners Network, his uncle, who ran the Korean branch of the family holdings, his cousin Seungmin, who smiled at Nyara with a warmth she had always found genuine and never quite understood, given that he worked that closely with Daejin. And Daejin's mother, Mrs. Hana Kwon, who had welcomed Nyara into the family with a grace that was flawless and completely impenetrable, the social equivalent of a locked room with fresh flowers on the table outside it. At 4:37 p.m., 43 minutes before the ceremony, a makeup brush paused on Nyara's cheekbone because she had gone still. The stylist said something. Nyara answered. The brush resumed, but her body had registered something her mind had not yet caught up to. A weight in the air of the room. Not a sound, not a temperature change, more like a shift in pressure. The almost physical sensation of a space reorganizing itself around the presence of something that had not been there a moment before. She knew that feeling. She had felt it exactly once before, in a covered walkway in London in the rain, when a boy stood close enough that the air between them became something she could feel against her skin. Her phone was face down on the vanity. She did not look at it. Clara appeared in the doorway at 5:45 and said, "Guests are seated. Pastor Yoon is ready. Mr. Kwon is at the altar." Her father appeared behind Clara, offered his arm. Nyara stood. The dress settled around her with a sound like a quiet exhale. The cathedral train flowed behind her, 12 feet of ivory silk that would have its own gravity coming down the aisle. Amara adjusted the veil. Jade said she looked like a painting and meant it. Nyara looked at her father. He was watching her with that expression again, the one she could not translate. "Ready?" he said. She put her hand in the crook of his elbow. She did not answer. They walked. The music began as the doors to the grand hall opened. A string arrangement, measured and stately and exactly as she had chosen it 8 months ago, when she had been a different version of herself, who had believed that choosing a wedding song was a form of meaning. The hall opened up before her. Candlelight, flowers, faces turning, 400 people, standing. And at the far end of the aisle, at the altar between 2 columns of white roses, Daejin Kwon. He was dressed in a custom black suit. He was watching her walk toward him the way she had seen him watch things he was about to acquire. With satisfaction. With possession. With the settled expression of a man who had decided an outcome and was now simply watching it arrive. She kept her face composed. She kept her steps even. Halfway down the aisle, she passed Daejin's mother, who was seated in the front row on the right. Mrs. Kwon caught her eye and smiled. A perfect smile, the kind that gives nothing away. For a reason she could not explain in that moment, a reason that would become very clear very soon, looking at Mrs. Kwon's face made something in Nyara's stomach drop cleanly through the floor. She reached the altar. Daejin took her hands. His grip was warm, firm, certain. He looked at her and said very quietly, so only she could hear, "You're here. Not you look beautiful. Not I love you, not I'm so glad you're here." As though her presence was a confirmation he had needed and had just received. The officiant opened his book, and then, at 6:02 p.m. precisely, with the clean certainty of something that had always been coming, the doors at the back of the hall opened, not forcefully, not dramatically, the way a period ends a sentence, and the room changed. It was the silence that reached her first, the kind that moves through a space in a wave, starting from the back, spreading forward, reaching her before she turned around. 400 people, trained in composure, all of them. And yet the silence swept the hall like something physical. Daejin's hands, still holding hers, went rigid. Nyara turned. Chapter 5. He was dressed in black, no tie, the jacket cut close, the collar open by exactly 1 button, the kind of precision that was not careless, but the opposite of careless. He stood at the center of the open doors with the stillness that she had spent 9 years trying to convince herself she had misremembered. She had not misremembered anything. Jae-hyun Ryu was 6 feet of absolute composure in a room of 400 people who had just gone completely quiet. He did not look around. He did not look at the guests or the candles or the flowers or the $400,000 of event productions surrounding him on all sides. He looked at one thing. He looked at Nyara. And the look, steady, unhurried, containing 9 years of silence and 3 words sent 48 minutes ago, landed with a weight that she felt in the center of her chest. He was not the boy from London. That much was immediately and entirely clear. The boy from London had been still in the way that water is still before you break its surface. The man standing at the back of the Grand Ashford's ballroom was still in a completely different way. The way a decision is still. Final and made and unmoved by anything in the room. He had not aged the way most people age. He had clarified. The jaw harder. The eyes the same. That same complete attention, but carrying something beneath them now that had not been there at 17. Something that had been built and paid for and was not going anywhere. He took one step inside. Two things happened simultaneously. The first was that the 4 security personnel stationed at the interior hall doors, men hired by Daejin's team, trained and serious, with the specific physical confidence of people who do not hesitate, looked at Jae-hyun and did not move. Not a freeze born of confusion, a stillness born of recognition, the kind that lives in the body before the mind articulates it. They knew who had just walked in, and they had made a calculation in under 3 seconds that intercepting him was not something they were prepared to do. The second thing that happened was that Daejin Kwon let go of Nyara's hands. He had not meant to. She felt the moment his grip released, not dropped, released, a deliberate uncoupling, the hands of a man who needed his hands free. She turned to look at him and found something she had never seen on his face in 2 years. Not anger, fear. In less than a second, it was replaced by the composed, pleasant expression he wore as a default. His jaw was set. His eyes had gone to the back of the hall and stayed there. He was already managing the situation internally. She could see the calculations moving behind his eyes, rapid and practiced, the way a chess player reads a board that has just gone wrong. Jae-hyun walked forward. He did not hurry. His pace was even and unhurried and consumed the distance between the doors and the altar with the particular patience of a man who had decided this was already over and was simply covering the remaining ground. The string quartet had stopped. Nobody had told them to stop. They had simply stopped. Nyara stood at the altar and watched him walk toward her and felt, beneath the shock and the fear and the structural collapse of everything she had spent 2 years building, a current of something she could not name and would not name and did not need to name because her body already knew its name. He stopped 12 feet from the altar, not close enough to touch, far enough that the space between them was its own statement. He looked at her. She looked at him. 9 years and 8 seconds. Daejin stepped in front of her, not protective, positioned. The difference being that protection faces outward and positioning faces inward, and what Daejin did in that moment was place himself between Nyara and Jae-hyun in the way a man places himself between another man and something he owns. Jae-hyun's eyes moved from Nyara to Daejin. Something in his expression shifted slightly. Not anger, not surprise, something quieter and considerably more dangerous, which was recognition. "You shouldn't be here." Daejin's voice was controlled, almost casual. Almost. Jae-hyun tilted his head the smallest possible amount, the gesture of a man hearing a sentence he does not find worth arguing with. "You built your empire on borrowed ground," he said. His voice was low, carried through the silent hall as though the room itself was leaning in. "Don't talk to me about what I'm allowed." Daejin did not respond. Around them, 400 guests were motionless. Senators and investors, old money and new power, all of them watching with the particular stillness of people who understand they are in a room where something real is happening and have no framework for it. Nyara was watching Jae-hyun's face. She had spent 2 years telling herself she had constructed him in memory, built him larger than he was, more certain than he was, more permanent. She had told herself the version of him she carried was a teenager's creation, inflated by youth and distance and the specific ache of loss. She had been wrong about that. He was exactly as she remembered. He was more. He looked at her once more, directly at her, past Daejin, made with a focus that dismissed everything in the room except her. "Tell her," he said, and his voice was perfectly level, "what your family did to mine." 3 seconds of total silence. Daejin's composure held, and then Jae-hyun said it. The name. The full name. Not Ryu, not the ghost name, not the network name. The full name of Jae-hyun's father. The name of the syndicate. The year. The specific, documented, operational detail of what the Kwon family had done 14 years ago in a transaction that had never appeared in any financial filing or police record or newspaper investigation. Because it had been buried, very carefully, very deliberately, by the people standing in this room. Nyara's head turned slowly toward Daejin. He was looking at the floor, the most expensive floor she had ever stood on. Unpolished marble with gold inlay, and Daejin Kwon, the man she was about to marry, the man who had told her she made him want to be honest, was looking at it like it might open up and take him somewhere else. "Is it true?" she said. Her voice came out steady. She was surprised by that. Daejin raised his eyes, and in the half-second before he found his composure again, in that raw, unmanaged half-second, she saw it. Not denial. Calculation. How much does she know? What can be managed? How do I frame this? Then his face reset, smooth, controlled, warm. "Nyara," he said, "this isn't the time, or is it true?" Not a question anymore. Silence. And then quietly, in the voice of a man who had decided the truth was simply another variable to be managed, Daejin said, "It was business." The word business dropped into the room and landed like something cold. Nyara looked at it, stood with it, let herself feel the full weight of what had just been confirmed, not just the revelation about Daejin's family, not just the history of blood and betrayal that Jae-hyun had just laid open in front of 400 witnesses, but the smaller, more private devastation of this moment. The face of the man she had almost married, the calculation behind the warmth, the audit behind the affection. She had known, not this, not the specific crime, but she had known there was a room in him she had never been allowed into. She had known, and she had chosen not to press on it because she had been so committed to the life she was building that she had been willing to build it on a foundation she had never fully inspected. She was not willing anymore. She looked at Jae-hyun. He was watching her, not with urgency, not with expectation, with that same complete, unhurried attention he had given her at 17 in the rain, as though he had already accepted every possible outcome and was simply present for whichever one she chose. He said nothing. He did not need to, because the question was no longer his to ask. It was hers to answer. And somewhere behind her composure, behind the ivory silk and the cathedral train and the 400 witnesses and the weight of 2 families and 2 empires and everything she had agreed to become, she was already answering it. What does a woman do when the life she built turns out to be a beautiful, carefully constructed lie? Does she stay inside it because she built it? Or does she walk out of it because she is still herself? Chapter 6. The word landed and did not leave. Business. Daejin had said it the way a man says a word he has said many times before in rooms where it was accepted without question. Clean, efficient, final. The word of a man who had long ago decided that the difference between strategy and crime was simply a matter of who was writing the report afterward. Nyara stood at the altar and let the word move through her. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She did not do any of the things that 400 watching people might have expected from a woman who had just been handed the specific, documented proof that the man she was about to marry had built his fortune on the erasure of another family's blood. She simply went still. The kind of still that is not emptiness. The kind that is the opposite. Every nerve in the body firing at once, every piece of information she had ever set aside now arriving together, organized and undeniable, forming a picture she had been refusing to look at straight for 2 years. All of it arriving at the same time, all of it making sense at the same time. The unannounced arrivals, the questions that were audits, the warmth that had a ceiling, the way he said "you belong here" with the particular weight of a man marking a territory and not a man expressing love. The meeting in Midtown she had not known about. His mother's smile that gave away nothing because there was something specific behind it being withheld. She understood now what she had been standing inside. Not a relationship, an acquisition. She looked at Daejin. He had recovered. His expression was back to managed, Warm eyes, set jaw, the careful arrangement of features that said, "I am reasonable, I am stable, I am the rational choice." He reached for her hand. She did not give it to him. That was not a decision she made consciously. Her body simply did not extend toward him. Her hands stayed at her sides, inside the folds of $120,000 of ivory silk, and she looked at Daejin Kwon with total clarity for the first time since she had met him. He read it. She saw him read it. The micro-shift behind his eyes, the moment the calculation changed, the moment he understood that managing this situation was going to require a different approach than he had planned. "Nyara," his voice dropped, private, intimate, calibrated to reach only her. "Whatever he told you, whatever version of history he is carrying in here, you need to understand that you are hearing one side of something that is far more complicated than—" "How old was he?" she said. Daejin stopped. "When your family moved against his," she said. "How old was Jae-hyun?" Silence. She already knew. She had heard it in the names Jae-hyun had stated. She had done the math in the seconds it took for Daejin to find his next sentence. Jae-hyun had been 10 years old. 10 years old when the Kwon family had orchestrated the dismantling of the Ryu Syndicate, the staged exposure of his father's network to rival factions, the engineered massacre that had left 6 men dead and a 10-year-old boy in the custody of an uncle, who ran what remained of a broken organization. 10 years old. And Daejin, whose family had done it, who had grown up with that knowledge, who had sat across from her at dinners and charity galas and quiet private evenings and never once in 2 years opened a single door into that room, had called it business. "You knew who I was to him," Nyara said. Not a question. Something moved across Daejin's face. So fast most people would have missed it. She did not miss it. "You researched me before the gala," she said. "My father, my history, my school records." She paused. "You knew I went to Hartwell." The hall was so quiet she could hear the candles. "You didn't find me by accident," she said. Jae-hyun had not moved from where he stood. He was watching this the way he watched everything, completely, without urgency, letting it arrive at its own pace. But his eyes, when they met hers for a half-second across the space between them, confirmed what she was saying without confirming anything at all. She turned to Daejin one final time. "Was any of it real?" she asked. "Any piece of it?" The question was quiet. It was not angry. It was the specific question of a woman who had invested 2 years of her real self into something and needed, before she walked away from it, to know whether she had been completely alone inside it. Daejin looked at her, and for one moment, one unmanaged, unfiltered, genuinely human moment, something shifted in his face that was not calculation and was not performance. Something that looked almost like grief. Like a man who had started a plan and somewhere inside it had found something real and had not known what to do with it. "You were never part of the plan," he said quietly. She heard what he was not saying. She was supposed to be. And somewhere along the way that had changed, and he had not changed his plan. That was its own kind of answer. She breathed in slowly. Her hands came up from the folds of her dress. She reached back and unclipped the diamond bracelet from her right wrist, the one his mother had given her, warm smile, no key to the room behind it, and placed it on the altar beside the officiant's open book. The ring she left on. She would deal with the ring later. She turned, not toward the exit, not yet. She turned toward Jae-hyun, who was still standing in the same position, same stillness, 12 feet from the altar, watching her. She walked to him, not running, not stumbling. Walking the way she had learned to walk, with her spine straight and her pace deliberate and her face giving just enough and not one thing more. She walked past the first row of guests, past Daejin's mother whose perfect smile had finally cracked, past her own father who was standing now with his hand half extended toward her as though he was not yet sure whether to stop her. She reached Jae-hyun. He did not reach for her, did not grab her arm, did not touch her face, did not do any of the things a man in a movie does in this moment. He simply turned, slightly, so that they were standing side by side, both facing the doors. And she understood, in that orientation, in the wordless physical grammar of it, that he was not rescuing her. He was standing beside her. There was a difference. The difference was the entire point. From behind her, she heard Daejin say her name, once, controlled, certain, the way he was always certain. She did not stop. She kept walking. Behind her, the hall broke. Slowly at first, a murmur, a movement, the sound of 400 people exhaling at the same time after holding their breath. Then voices, then the specific organized chaos of a public moment coming apart at its seams. She did not look back. She and Jae-hyun reached the doors together. And then she stopped. She turned slightly, not enough to face the room, just enough to send her voice behind her. The words came out of her from somewhere she had not planned to access in public, in front of politicians and investors and the people who controlled industries and the mother-in-law she would never have. "You were already here," she said. The words were for Jae-hyun, but the room heard them. Silence. She felt Jae-hyun go very still beside her, not with surprise, with the specific quality of a man who has been known accurately and was not prepared for how much that would cost him. She stepped through the doors. He was one step behind her. Now the real question, the one that will follow both of them out of this hall and into everything that comes next, is this. Jae-hyun did not come because she sent a message. She said it herself. He was already here. And if he was already here, already positioned, already moving, then what exactly had he come to do? And how much of what just happened was rescue? And how much was a plan finally reaching its final chapter? Chapter 7. She did not cry in the car. The car was a black SUV with tinted windows that had appeared at the service entrance of the Grand Ashford within 40 seconds of them exiting through the side corridor. No one had called for it, at least not in the last hour, which meant it had been arranged before the ceremony began, which meant a great many things that Nyara was not yet ready to organize into language. She sat in the back seat with her cathedral train gathered in her lap, in an enormous ivory cloud. Outside the tinted windows, Manhattan moved past in streaks of light and dark. Jae-hyun sat beside her with 4 inches of space between them and his forearm resting on his knee and his eyes on the window. Neither of them spoke for 11 blocks. She was grateful for that. The silence was not empty. It was weighted, full of everything that had just happened and everything that had not yet been said. But it was not hostile. It was the silence of 2 people who had known each other long enough to understand that some things require room before they can be named. At the 12th block, she said, "You were already in the building." Not a question. "Yes," he said, "before I sent the message." "Yes." She looked at his profile, the clean jaw, the way he held himself in a car the same way he held himself everywhere, occupying exactly the space he needed and no more. "So the message didn't bring you there," she said. He turned from the window to look at her. His eyes, in the low-moving light of the city passing outside, were exactly as she remembered them. That same complete, unfiltered attention. The kind that made you feel like the only thing in the room, which was both the most wanted feeling in the world and the most dangerous. "No," he said, "but it changed what I was going to do." She held that sentence in the air between them for a moment, turned it over. "How?" she said. He was quiet for 3 seconds. Exactly 3. She knew because she counted, the way she had always quietly counted the beats of his pauses when they were 17, learning the rhythm of a person who chose his words the way chess players choose moves. "I came to end Daejin," he said. "Professionally, financially. Everything his family built on what they took. I had enough to collapse it. I've had enough for 6 months. He paused. "I was going to do it quietly, from outside. No one needed to see me." "You were never supposed to see me." The city moved past. A yellow cab, a woman walking a dog, a food truck closing up for the night. "Your message changed the calculation," he said. "If you were marrying him without knowing, If I took him apart after the wedding and you were already his wife, you would have been inside the collapse. She sat with that. You were protecting me, she said. I was correcting the plan, he said. She almost smiled. That was so precisely him. 9 years gone, and he still would not use the word protecting when a more accurate word was available. Jae-hyun, she said. It was the first time she had said his name. Out loud. In this car. In 9 years. His name in her voice still landed in his body the same way it always had. She could tell by the half-second in which he was completely still before he breathed again. Why didn't you tell me? She said. 6 months ago. A year ago. Before any of this. He looked at the window again. Because you had a life, he said. A real one. Built by you. I didn't have the right to walk into it and hand you a version of your fiancé that you hadn't asked for. You had the right, she said. I gave you the right at 17 in the rain. He turned to look at her, and something in his face, the place just behind the composure, just underneath the certainty, moved. Like a wall that had been perfectly maintained for 9 years, registering for the first time a vibration in its foundation. I know, he said. He did not say anything else. She did not ask for anything else. The car stopped at a building she did not recognize. Midtown, but east. A building with no signage and a private entrance and a doorman who opened the car door without making eye contact with either of them. She gathered her train and stepped out. He was beside her before she straightened. Not touching her. Present. The same 4 inches of space that was not distance. It was calibration. They walked inside. In the elevator, he pressed the button for 38. She watched the numbers climb. At 22, she said, You said when you came for me you wouldn't ask twice. He looked at the doors. I remember, he said. So ask, she said. Once. The elevator reached 38. The doors opened. He stepped out and held the door and looked at her. Really looked at her. The way she had not been looked at in so long that she had stopped noticing she was being looked past instead of at. He said, stay. 1 word. No performance in it, no command. Just a word held out in a hand that had been deciding for 9 years whether it was allowed to open. She stepped out of the elevator. The doors closed behind her. She was still wearing the dress. She was still wearing his ring, Daejin's ring, on her left hand. She looked down at it once, in the corridor of a building she had never been in, standing beside a man who had walked back into her life through the back doors of her wedding with no weapons and no raised voice and no apology and no drama. She slid the ring off her finger, held it for a moment, set it on the narrow console table by the elevator. Then she turned to face whatever came next. What does a woman owe the man who chose to protect her life even when that meant staying invisible? And now that the protection is over and they are finally standing in the same room, what happens when 2 people who have been each other's unfinished sentence for 9 years finally run out of reasons not to finish it? Chapter 8. 3 days after Nyara Adewale-Kang walked away from her own wedding, Kwon Global Partners lost $47 million in a single trading session. It was reported as a market correction. The financial press used language like sector volatility and portfolio realignment. The analysts who covered Daejin's holdings used the word unexpected 17 times across 4 different reports, which is what analysts say when they mean something happened that was not an accident, but they cannot prove it yet. The second event came 6 days after the wedding. A sealed filing in a Southern District federal court. The filing cited offshore account structures, capital movements between 2009 and 2014, and the names of 2 shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands under names that translated directly, in Korean, to old family terms for inheritance. The filing was sealed, but sealed in the way of things that are intended to eventually be unsealed. Sealed the way a door is locked when the person locking it wants it found. The third thing, the one that split Daejin's world at its base and could not be managed or framed or walked back, arrived on day 9. A document. 22 pages. Distributed simultaneously to 3 financial journalists, one federal investigator, and the editor of a Korean business publication that had been running positive profiles of Kwon Global Partners for 6 consecutive years. The document contained wire transfer records, meeting transcripts, and one photograph, taken in 2009 at a meeting that officially never occurred, showing Daejin's father across a table from 2 men whose names appeared on an international criminal intelligence registry. One of those men had died in 2011. One of those men was Jae-hyun's father. The photograph was not the most damaging thing in the document. The most damaging thing was the margin note, handwritten in what 3 separate handwriting analysts would later confirm was the elder Kwon's hand. 8 words, a date, and an amount. That was the thing that could not be survived. Nyara learned about each development from a phone Jae-hyun had placed on the kitchen counter of the 38th floor apartment the morning after the wedding. The phone was a clean number, untraceable, new, and she had not asked why he had it or why he had anticipated she would need it. She had simply used it. She had called her father first. That conversation lasted 47 minutes and covered, in sequence, her father's initial silence, his controlled exhale, his 7 questions, her answers to each, and finally, after a pause that lasted long enough for her to hear him deciding, his voice, quiet and certain, saying, "You did the right thing." She had not cried during the conversation. She cried afterward, briefly, sitting on the floor of the bathroom in the apartment with her back against the cold of the tub and the dress, which she had finally changed out of, folded on the counter. Not for Daejin, not even really for the 2 years. She cried for the girl who had been tired of waiting and had made a tired decision and had spent 2 years building a life inside it with genuine effort and genuine hope, and had deserved something more honest to build inside. She let herself have the floor for 20 minutes. Then she stood up, washed her face, and walked back into the kitchen. Jae-hyun was at the counter with 2 cups of coffee and a file open in front of him that he closed when she came in. He looked at her face, said nothing about it. "The second filing goes in tomorrow," he said. "After that, the document. The timing matters." She sat across from him, wrapped her hands around the cup. "How long have you been building this?" she asked. 3 years, he said. She looked at him. "I found the photograph 14 years ago," he said. "In my uncle's things. I was 21. I didn't have the infrastructure to do anything with it. I spent 3 years building it." He turned the cup on the counter. "Once. The financial architecture took another 2 years. The legal pathway and finding a jurisdiction where the filing would hold, where the right investigator was in place, another year." 6 years, she said. 6 years, he confirmed. She looked at the closed file. "You didn't need to be at that wedding," she said. "You could have released everything from anywhere in the world. It would have worked without you in that room." He did not answer, which was its own answer. She looked at him. The coffee steam rose between them. Outside, Manhattan was doing what Manhattan did, moving, indifferent, enormous, the city that had hosted her almost wedding and her almost life, and was now hosting whatever this was with equal disinterest. "You came because of me," she said. "I came," he said, "because 6 years is a long time to do something right, and I wanted to be in the room when it finished." "That's part of it," she said. His jaw moved. "That's part of it," he said. She held the warmth of the cup between her palms and looked at this man, this person who had been the shape of something missing for 9 years, who had spent 6 years building a legal and financial mechanism to dismantle the family of the man she had almost married, who had walked into her wedding in a black jacket with no weapons and no raised voice and turned the entire room by standing still. And she felt the specific, complex, entirely inconvenient feeling of knowing someone exactly. Not perfectly, not completely. She did not know the 6 years. She did not know the uncle. She did not know the infrastructure or the networks or the rooms he had walked through to get here. But she knew him. The way you know a language you learned young and stopped speaking. You forget the vocabulary, you lose the grammar. But the rhythm stays. The shape of the thought stays. The fundamental logic of how sentences are built, that stays. She reached across the counter. Not for his hand. Just across. Her fingers resting on the surface, 2 inches from his. He looked at them. She said, "Tell me what happens after." He looked up. "After the filing," she said. "After the document. After Daejin's empire comes down. What happens after?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I go back to Seoul," he said. She nodded. "And?" she said. He looked at her fingers on the counter, 2 inches from his. "And nothing," he said. "There's no and, I go back. What I came to do is done." She moved her fingers 1 inch closer. "You said I won," she said quietly. "In the elevator. You asked me to stay, that's not nothing." He looked at her hand. His jaw moved once. He said very quietly, "Nyara." Her name in his voice after 9 years was not what she expected. She had expected it to feel like completion, like a note resolving. Instead, it felt like the opposite, like the opening note of something that had not started yet, like a door not closing but opening. His hand moved across the counter and covered hers. The warmth of it hit her somewhere central and stayed there. Neither of them moved for a long time. Outside, Manhattan kept going. Inside, 2 people who had spent 9 years being each other's unfinished sentence sat in the quiet of a kitchen with their hands barely touching and the world they had just broken open still smoking around them. What does it cost a person to finally stop running from the thing they want? And is Jae-hyun's plan truly finished? Or has walking back into Nyara's life started something he had not calculated? Something that cannot be controlled? Something that lives completely outside the 6-year plan? Chapter 9. 22 days after the wedding, Daejin Kwon's name appeared on a federal indictment. It was not the end of things. Federal indictments are not ends. They are beginnings of a longer, more expensive, more grinding process that plays out over years in rooms that smell like paper and stale air, and the specific anxiety of people who once had everything now watching it be weighed and measured and possibly taken. But the indictment was a line. Before it, Daejin had options. After it, he had lawyers. Kwon Global Partners suspended operations pending review. 3 of its board members resigned within a week. The Korean business publication that had run 6 years of positive profiles ran a correction. Not an apology, a correction. Which is what publications do when they want to distance themselves from a story without admitting they were part of telling it wrong. Daejin's mother released a statement through the family's PR firm. It was 4 sentences long and contained the word "unfortunately" twice, which is how powerful families say we knew this was coming without saying we knew this was coming. Nyara read the statement on her phone in the apartment in Tribeca she had moved into 3 weeks after the wedding. A sublet, temporary. She had gone back to her old apartment for 2 days and found that it felt like wearing clothes that no longer fit. Not wrong, exactly, just shaped for a person she was still in the process of understanding she had already stopped being. She was sitting at her kitchen table with coffee and a legal pad when her phone rang with a number she did not recognize. She answered. It was a woman named Patricia Seo, a journalist, federal court reporter for a publication that Nyara knew and respected. Patricia had been covering the indictment filing and had a source, she did not name the source, who had suggested that Nyara might have relevant context. Nyara listened. Then she said, "I'll think about it." She hung up and looked at the legal pad. She had been writing. Not a statement, not notes, just writing. The way she had as a kid before she learned to organize everything into purpose and output, just putting things down in the order they arrived. The 2 years, the things she had noticed, the things she had chosen not to press on, the things that made sense now that she had the full picture. She thought about Patricia Seo's call. She thought about what it would cost to speak on record. Not personally. She had the capacity for that. She had always had the capacity for hard things. She thought about the cost to her father's relationships, to the business circles that overlapped between their families, to the particular careful balance that Black professionals in certain financial spaces maintained with absolute deliberateness, because the margin for error was not equal, and everyone in those rooms knew it. She thought about the 10-year-old boy. She picked up the phone and called Patricia Seo back. She gave a 30-minute interview on background, specific terms, attorney present on the line. She described 2 years of relationship. She described the things that had felt wrong that she had chosen to interpret charitably. She did not perform victimhood. She was not a victim. She was a person who had made decisions based on incomplete information, which was a different thing, and she wanted it described as a different thing. Patricia Seo listened, asked precise, respectful questions, said thank you at the end with the specific sincerity of someone who understood the weight of what they had just been given. The piece ran 4 days later. It was careful. It was accurate. It did not center Nyara. She had been specific about that. The piece centered the financial crimes, the history, the document. Nyara appeared in 2 paragraphs. I'm described as a former fiancé who corroborated specific behavioral patterns consistent with the broader picture of control the indictment described. 2 paragraphs. That was enough. Because the piece, combined with the document, combined with the filings, combined with the resignation of 3 board members who each issued carefully worded statements on their way out the door. The combined weight of all of it turned the Kwon Empire from a story about a market correction into a story about a pattern, and patterns are what bring things down. Nyara's phone was busy for 3 days after the piece ran. Friends, colleagues, her father who called 3 times in 2 hours, which was 4 times more than he had called anyone in the last decade, and meant he was either very proud or very concerned, and she suspected it was both simultaneously. There was one call she had not anticipated. Seungmin, Daejin's cousin, the one whose warmth she had always found genuine and never understood. He called on the 3rd day. She almost did not pick up. She picked up. He said, I want you to know, I didn't know all of it. Some of it, yes. Some of it I chose not to ask about, which I understand is the same thing. He paused. I'm sorry. That's all. I don't need anything from you, I just needed to say it. She sat with that for a moment. Thank you, she said. He hung up. She set her phone on the table and looked at the legal pad. What she felt was not closure. Closure was a word that got used for things that had clean endings, and this did not have a clean ending. There were ongoing legal proceedings. There were questions that would not be answered in this news cycle or the next. There were 2 years of her actual life that had been spent in a relationship that was partly real and partly architecture, and you could not simply file that under resolved and walk away from it. What she felt was something more accurate, more useful. She felt like the ground under her feet was real. For the first time in 2 years, maybe longer, she was standing on something that was actually there. But there was something else she felt too. Something she had been circling for 3 weeks. Something she had been approaching from the edges of, taking small amounts of at a time the way you let your eyes adjust to a bright room before you fully enter it. She opened her contacts, found the number he had left on the kitchen counter the morning after the wedding. She had not called it since the day she called her father. She had told herself she was giving him space. She had told herself things were complicated. She had told herself a number of reasonable, organized, well-structured things that were all technically true, and all completely beside the point. Her thumb hovered over the number. The ground under her feet was real. She pressed call. It rang 4 times. Then his voice, quiet, immediate, present. Nyara. 1 word. Her name in his voice still sounded like the beginning of something. Hi, she said. Silence. Not empty. Warm. Where are you? She asked. Pause. Seoul, he said. Her chest did something specific. How long? She asked. How long what? How long have you been there? Another pause. The kind that contains information. 12 days, he said. 12 days. He had been in Seoul for 12 days. He had left while she was setting up the sublet, while she was giving the interview, while she was reading the piece that named her in 2 paragraphs and feeling the ground come back under her feet. He had gone back, exactly as he said he would. "Jae-hyun," she said. "Yes." She looked at the legal pad on her table, the pages of writing, the 2 years, the before and the after, the things she had been circling. "I'm coming to Seoul," she said. The silence on the other end lasted 5 full seconds. Then, and she heard it, clear as anything in the quiet exhale before his next word, he released something that had been held for a long time. "Okay," he said. Chapter 10. She landed at Incheon on a Tuesday morning. The flight was 14 hours and she did not sleep for most of it. Not from anxiety. It's from the particular alertness of a person moving towards something they have decided on completely. She sat in her window seat with the dark of the Pacific below and felt awake in a way that had nothing to do with caffeine. She had packed light. 2 bags. The kind of packing you do when you are not sure how long you are staying because you are not trying to set a limit on it. Her father had said, at the airport, standing at the departures drop-off with her 2 bags on the curb between them, "You know what you're doing." It was not a question. It was her father's version of "I trust you." She had kissed his cheek, said, "I know." He had nodded, pressed her hand once, and gotten back into the car without looking back, because looking back was not how Nyara Adewale loved the people he loved. Seoul in early morning was cold and vast and moving fast. She had been here twice before, briefly, with her mother on architecture visits. She remembered the scale of it, the way the city was organized like a person who had thought everything through in advance. Layers and systems and connections that were deliberate and exact and somehow still felt alive. Jae-hyun met her at the arrivals hall. He was standing outside the barrier. No sign with her name, no flowers. He was in dark gray, arms at his sides, watching the doors. When she came through and their eyes met, he did not smile right away. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the grand Ashford ballroom, with total, unhurried attention. And then something in his face shifted. Not a smile, exactly. The thing that comes before a smile in a person who has not smiled easily in a very long time. She walked to him. She stopped 2 feet away. He said, "You actually came?" She said, "You sound surprised." He said, "I'm not surprised." A pause. "I wasn't prepared." She looked at him for a moment. That admission, small, precise, completely out of character for a man who had spent 6 years engineering an outcome down to its individual moving parts, landed in her chest and stayed. "Neither am I," she said. He picked up her heavier bag without asking. She kept the smaller one. And they walked out of Incheon Airport together into the cold Seoul morning like 2 people who had been circling the same point for 9 years and had finally decided to stand in it instead. He lived in a penthouse in Yongsan-gu. The building was one of those structures that communicated security not through obvious display but through absence. No visible cameras, no ostentatious lobby. The kind of building whose residents had specifically decided not to be noticed. The apartment itself was large and spare, floor-to-ceiling windows on the south and east walls showing the Han River and the city beyond it. Minimal furniture, not from lack of means but from the deliberate taste of someone who had decided that space itself was a form of clarity. There was a small shelf near the entry with 3 books and a photograph she did not expect. She stopped at the shelf. The photograph was old, faded at the edges. A woman, Korean, early 30s. The kind of beauty that was structural, holding a child of maybe 5 or 6 who was looking at the camera with eyes that were immediately and unmistakably recognizable. His mother. She looked at the photograph for a long moment. He had come to stand slightly behind her, not crowding her, just present. "She's beautiful," Nyara said. "Yes," he said. She turned from the shelf and looked around the apartment, the city visible through 2 walls of glass, the precise emptiness of a space that had been lived in by exactly one person for exactly long enough that it had shaped itself to him. His rhythms, his silence, his controlled way of occupying the world. "This is where you live," she said. "This is where I sleep," he said. "I'm not sure I've been living anywhere." She turned to look at him. Well, he was watching her with the expression she had catalogued at 17, the one that was not quite a smile but was positioned just before one, like he was deciding whether to let it happen. She crossed the distance between them. Not slowly, not dramatically, just directly, the way she had been doing things since she walked out of that wedding hall. He did not step back. He did not arrange himself. He simply stood there and watched her come toward him, and when she was close enough that the air between them had temperature, he raised one hand and touched her jaw. Gently, just his fingers, along the line of her face. The way you touch something you have been afraid to touch for a long time and are finally allowing yourself to reach for. She covered his hand with hers. "Jae-hyun," she said quietly. "I know," he said. She said, 9 years. He said, 9 years. And then she was in his arms. Not falling into them, stepping into them, deliberately with her whole self, the way she did everything when she had decided. His arms came around her, and he held her with a grip that had nothing of performance in it, and everything of finality. His chin at her temple, her hands at his back, both of them completely still. The city moved beyond the glass. The Han River caught the morning light. Somewhere below, Seoul was running through its rhythms. In the apartment on the 38th floor, for the first time in 9 years, Nyara Adewale-Kang was exactly where she was supposed to be. Chapter 11. The first week in Seoul was not a honeymoon. That was what she had expected, in some half-formed way. That arriving would mean arriving. That the decision to come would translate automatically into ease. She had made the decision with clarity. That was real. But clarity about a direction is different from knowing the terrain you are walking into, and the terrain in this case was 9 years of separate lives that had developed habits and structures and specific ways of being in the world that two people who felt like home to each other still had to learn to fit together without pressure. He woke at 5. Silently. She did not hear him leave the bedroom the first 3 mornings. The 4th morning she was already awake when his eyes opened and he looked at her with the unhurried expression of a man who was still deciding whether to be surprised, and she looked back at him. And they lay there in the gray Seoul morning light for 11 minutes, saying absolutely nothing, and it was the most comfortable she had felt in years. He had a network. That was the right word. Not an organization, not a structure, not a business. A network. People who owed him things. People who he had protected or elevated or simply found useful. She met them gradually, in small doses, with the specific care he took in managing what she was exposed to and when. She noticed the care and did not comment on it immediately. She filed it away for later. There was a man named Park Taejin who arrived on day 4 with a folder and left without the folder. There was a woman named Mireille who ran what appeared to be a legitimate financial consultancy and spoke to Jae-hyun in a rapid, quiet Korean that Nyara's modest language skills could not follow, but whose tone she could read without translation. There was a car that arrived on day 6 to take Jae-hyun somewhere he did not explain, and from which he returned 3 hours later with a cut on his left hand that he cleaned and dressed without comment. She looked at the bandage over dinner. "Do I ask?" she said. He looked at his hand. "Not yet," he said. She looked at him. "Okay," she said. Not because she was naive about what that meant. Not because she had somehow constructed a version of Jaehyun Ryu that did not include the rooms she could not yet enter. She had known at 17 that there was something underneath the stillness. She had known at 19 when his name started surfacing in her father's worried phone conversations. She had known in the Grand Ashford ballroom when 4 armed security personnel looked at him and decided not to move. She had come here with her eyes open. She said okay because she had decided to extend the same trust she was asking him to extend to her. Not blind trust. Present trust. The kind that says, I see what you are not telling me, and I am choosing to wait until you are ready because I believe the waiting is worth what comes after it. He looked at her for a long moment. Then quietly, he said, 6 months. Give me 6 months to close the last of it, the parts that are still open. And after 6 months, she said. After 6 months, he said, I tell you everything. She held his gaze. Everything, she said. Everything, he confirmed. She reached across the table and cut another piece of the food in front of her. A Korean dish his housekeeper had made, something with braised short ribs and a broth she had been working her way through slowly because it was dense and rich and required attention. And she said without looking up, then 6 months. He watched her eat. She felt him watching and did not look up. Because there were things about Jaehyun Ryu that she had noticed in this first week. Small, true things. The way he made coffee in the morning with the deliberateness of someone who found routine grounding. The way he read, not on a screen, but from actual books, held in both hands, like the weight of them mattered. Like the way he looked at her sometimes when she was not looking at him, she had caught the reflection twice in the kitchen window, with an expression that was not guarded and was not performed. An expression that she did not have a name for, except to say that it was the way a person looks at something they had not let themselves want for so long that wanting it now felt like relearning a language. She looked up. He was still watching. She said, Stop looking at me like that, he said. Like what? She said, like I might disappear. Something moved across his face. Old habit, he said. She set down her fork, leaned forward slightly on her forearms, looked at him across the table with the direct, clear, undisguised attention that had always been her answer to his composure. Not matching it, but meeting it with something equally real. I'm not going anywhere, she said. I came 14 hours across the Pacific with 2 bags. That is not the luggage of someone who is planning to disappear. His jaw worked once. Then, finally, the smile. Real. Complete. The one that had always surprised him, like joy was a room he rarely entered. It broke something open in the apartment. Not dramatically. Just the air changed. The room became warmer than it had been. The city outside the glass kept moving and they kept sitting at the table, and somewhere underneath all the history and the complexity and the 6 months of still open rooms, something simple and true was breathing. She picked up her fork. He reached across the table and tucked a piece of her hair back from her face. His fingers grazed her temple. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. When she opened them, he was watching her. 6 months, he said. 6 months, she agreed. Then quietly, she said, and after that, you're mine. He was still for a half second. Then, for the first time in 9 years, Jaehyun Ryu smiled at her the way he used to in London, full and rare and belonging only to her. Already, he said. 6 months, closed rooms, things he has not told her yet, and a network that operates in spaces most people do not look at. What lives behind that last open door? And when it finally opens, will Nyara be ready for everything that comes through it? Chapter 12. Final chapter. It was a Monday morning in the 6th month when Jaehyun set a file on the kitchen counter and said, Sit down. Not a suggestion, not quite a command. Well, the specific tone of a man who had been preparing to say something for a long time and had decided this was the morning. Nyara looked at the file, looked at him, sat down. He sat across from her. He had been in 3 separate meetings in the past 2 weeks that he had not detailed. He had flown to Tokyo for 36 hours and returned with the expression of a person who had finished something. Park Taejin had stopped coming to the apartment. Mirai had called twice with conversations that lasted less than 90 seconds each and ended with Jaehyun saying the same word, done, before hanging up. She had noticed all of it. She had said nothing. She had been counting the months. He opened the file. He began to talk. He talked for 2 hours. He told her about his father. Not the diplomat story, the real one. The man his father had actually been. The leader of a network that had operated across 4 countries for 20 years, built on a specific moral code that was not legal, but was not arbitrary. Rules about who was touched, rules about what was traded, lines that were kept. His father had not been a good man by any standard that lived in the light, but he had been a specific man, a man with a code, a man who had been building something he intended to pass on. He told her about the betrayal, not the legal version, the human version, his father's trust in the Kwon family, a partnership that had operated for 7 years, the night it ended. What happened to the 6 men? What happened to the boy who was left at his uncle's apartment with a phone call and a locked suitcase, and the specific silence of adults who have decided a child can be managed by simply being moved? He told her about his uncle, about the years of training, about what that training cost, about the things he had done between 19 and now that he would not excuse and would not dramatize. He said them plainly, the way you lay stones on a table. This happened, then this, then this. He did not ask for her reaction. He set it all down and let it be there. He told her about the 6 years of planning, not just the financial architecture, the human architecture, the people he had built trust with, the people he had helped not for strategy, but because the code his father had given him was still operating inside him even in the years when he had not wanted it to. The network he had assembled was not built on fear. It was built on a specific kind of loyalty that you only earn by being the person who shows up in the rooms where no one else would. He told her about the moment he found out she was engaged to Daejin. He was very still when he said this part. He had known about the engagement for 4 months before the wedding. He had gotten the information the way he got most information, through the network, cleanly, without drama. He had sat with it for 3 days. Then he had adjusted the timeline on the operation, moved certain things forward, made a decision that changed the shape of everything. You accelerated the whole thing, Nyara said. Yes, he said. For me, she said. He looked at her. For both of us, he said. She looked at the file. Stacks of documents, wire transfers, names, a photograph she had not seen before, his father young before any of it, with a face that was recognizable from across a table. She turned the photograph face down, not because it hurt to look at, because she was not ready to look at it for as long as it deserved. Is it closed? She said. All of it. The open rooms. He was quiet for a moment. The legal proceedings against Daejin will take 2 more years, he said. I don't control the pace of that, but my part in it, yes, it's done. And the network? He looked at his hands. The bandage from month 1 was long gone, the cut healed. His hands on the table were still and steady and carried everything they had ever carried. Mirai takes operational lead as of last week, he said. I'm removed from the active structure. I'll be consulted. I won't be directing. Nyara was quiet. That's not the same as out, she said. No, he said. It's not the same as out. I can't tell you it is. He looked at her. I can tell you what I'm choosing. I'm not choosing out. That's not honest, and I won't say it to you. I'm choosing less. I'm choosing here. I'm choosing... He stopped. His jaw moved. You asked me at 19 why I disappeared. The real answer is that I left because I was going into something I couldn't take you into. I was not willing to take you into it. Silence. And now, she said. Now I'm asking you if you can live with the edges of it, he said. Not the center, the edges, the history of it, the weight of it. He looked at her directly. I'm asking honestly, because you deserve the choice with the full picture, not a version I've managed. She sat with that. The apartment was quiet around them. Seoul moved outside the glass. The Han River in the morning was a flat silver line under overcast sky. Somewhere in the kitchen, the coffee machine finished its cycle and went still. She thought about 2 years inside a beautiful lie. She thought about the girl who had cried on a bathroom floor and given herself 20 minutes. She thought about a covered walkway in London in the rain and 7 words that had been waiting to be said since she was 17. She thought about what it meant to be offered a real choice by a person who understood exactly what they were offering and exactly what it cost. She stood up from the table. She walked around it. She stood in front of him, and he looked up at her. All the composure and the history and the 9 years and the file full of stones. and she held his face in her hands. "Jae-hyun," she said. He said nothing. His eyes said everything. "I'm not afraid of the edges," she said. "I'm afraid of the silence, of you deciding what I can handle again." She held his face steady. "Don't decide for me. Not again. Not ever again." His hands came up and covered hers. "I won't," he said. She believed him, not blindly, not naively, with the specific belief of a person who has been lied to carefully and who can now tell the difference clearly between words said to manage and words said to mean. She leaned down and she kissed him. And he kissed her back, not carefully, not controlled, not the measured composure he brought to everything else in his life. With the full weight of a man who had been deciding for 9 years whether he was allowed to want this and had finally stopped deciding. They stayed like that for a long time. When she pulled back, he rested his forehead against hers, both of them breathing, both of them completely still. Outside, Seoul was going about its morning with complete indifference to the fact that 2 people in a 38th floor apartment with too much history and not enough time had just stepped through the last door. She sat beside him. He turned slightly, so they were shoulder to shoulder, both looking at the file on the table. So, she said. "So," he said. "What do we do with all of this?" He looked at the file for a moment. "We close it," he said. "Properly. Together." She looked at it too. There were things in that file that she would spend the next year learning, the full story, the real names, the decisions he had made and the ones he had refused, the weight he had carried in silence for the better part of a decade. She would learn all of it, gradually, honestly, in the way of 2 people who had decided that the only version of this they would accept was the true one. It would not be easy. It would not be safe. It would be real. And for Nyara Adewale-Kang, who had spent 2 years inside a carefully maintained lie and had walked out of it in $120,000 of ivory silk with her spine straight and her eyes clear. Real was the only thing she had ever actually wanted. She reached over and closed the file. Then she took his hand. Jae-hyun looked down at their hands on the table, her fingers between his. Something settled in his face, something old and held and finally, after 9 years, allowed to rest. He turned her hand over gently and pressed his lips to her palm. No performance, no theater, just him, just her, just the specific, irreducible truth of 2 people who had taken the long way around something inevitable and had arrived. "Welcome to my world," he said quietly. She looked at him. "I didn't come here for your world," she said. He looked up. "I came here for you," she said. And Jae-hyun Ryu, who had been still for most of his life, who had been controlled and deliberate and exactly calibrated in every room he had ever entered, had absolutely no response to that. Because some things do not require a response. Some things simply arrive and are true and do not need to be managed or improved or said back in a better way. He held her hand. She held his. Outside, Seoul kept moving. And 2 people who had spent 9 years being each other's unfinished sentence finally, quietly, completely, without an audience, reached the end of the page. This was never just a love story. It was a story about what it costs to be honest in a world that rewards the performance of honesty over the real thing. It was about a woman who chose truth over safety and a man who spent 9 years making sure the truth was ready for her when she got there. And it was about what happens when 2 people who have been shaped by loss and distance and the specific ache of choosing to love from a distance finally choose to simply stand still in the same room and stop being afraid of what that means. If this story moved you, if you felt something real in it, we want to hear from you. Drop in the comments and tell us, was Nyara right to walk away? Was Jae-hyun's silence over 9 years an act of protection or an act of fear? And could you have made the choice she made at that altar? Every comment you leave keeps stories like this alive on this channel. If you are new here, welcome. This is Afro-Korean Films HQ. No, we tell the stories that go where most people are afraid to look. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because we release new content regularly, and you do not want to find out a new story dropped 3 weeks after everyone else already felt it. And if this story hit you the way we hope it did, share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear it. Someone who is standing at their own altar, their own version of a decision, their own moment of choosing real over safe. They might need to know how this one ended.